Well, welcome to part 3 of the series that we're calling Breathing Room. And we've been doing this each week, so let's keep it up. Let's take a deep breath together. You ready? That's what the series is really all about. It's about that sacred space in our life where we just create some breathing room for the things that really matter in our lives. And so we've been acknowledging this tension that many of us feel that's in the race and the pace of life. It often just feels like it is moving so fast that it's hard to slow down and just catch up. Sometimes it's overwhelming. Many would even describe it as exhausting, maybe even a little bit out of balance. And so over the last few weeks together, we've been digging through this. In the very beginning, we talked about how to reclaim that space, that peace inside of our lives, that God has actually designed you. He's hardwired you to live different than what the cultural pressures are putting on us. And so we're to make room even for God himself. We talked last week a little bit about what it looks like for us to use our time wisely. It feels like the moments or even the years are just passing us by. And so what would that look like for us to make room for the things that matter in our schedules? Now, this week, I'm going to stretch it just a little bit here because we're going to talk about a topic that has a little bit of tension around it. Today, we're going to be talking about money. That's right. So maybe if you get a little bit anxious as we get into this, look, even for me to talk about this creates anxiety for me. And maybe we have to do one of those again. Just to be able to talk about money. Specifically, though, here's what I want to do is I want to help you in a way. I don't want anything from you. Let me just give you a heads up here. We're not passing containers, extra offerings, or anything, so you can just rest at ease. Here's what I want to talk about for just a few minutes. I want to talk about some financial breathing room in your life. What does that mean? What does it look like? There's a space in your budget, in your money, between how much you bring in and how much you send out. And the amount of space that you have in there, that breathing room, even if it doesn't exist or barely exist, there's a lot of pressure and tension that takes place inside of that space. And I want to talk about it for just a few minutes together. And to just set this up, this is going to be deeply spiritual. I know money seems practical, but it's deeply spiritual because there's more going on below the surface. And then 2, I'm going to give you 5 very practical helps that if you find yourself in a place where you're ever stressing about money, or if you're young, this may be preventative for you. If you're a little bit older and you've gone through some of this, maybe you can amen as we go through it together, okay? And so what I want to talk about is that space in between, that margin, that extra little bit of room in our lives that makes all of the difference. And to just kind of help to set this up a little bit, let me tell you a story. And this is a story of real people, but to protect the guilty, not so innocent, I've changed their names, okay? And so we're going to call them Mark and Sarah. If you are Mark and Sarah, this is not you, I promise. It's total coincidence, okay? And so let's jump into here. And so here's a couple that when they got married, they were the ones that from the outside, it just seemed like they had it all together. They had a beautiful family, husband and wife, good-looking couple. They had very great kids, a couple of beautiful kids. They lived in a charming little house. It was a nice place. They had good jobs. He worked, she worked. They had a decent household income. And everything from the outside, it looks picture perfect, but there's something going on the inside. See, as their life progressed, they would have increase, and every time there was increase, they started to do something. They started to make a mistake that many of us make. They started saying to themselves, you know what? Let's just upgrade our lifestyle. They convinced themselves that they were going to build a better life for their family, and so what they did was they bought the bigger house. What they did was they upgraded from that old pickup truck and they got the nice luxury SUV. And what they did was they enrolled their kids in private school. Our kids deserve the very best. And we're building the best life for our family. And for a while, it was very promising and satisfying until the bills started to back up and the pressure started to mount. Something happened. He had to go to work, extra hours to now just to make ends meet, where they had comfort, where there was some margin. Now she's got to go start a side hustle just to have some extra income. And in the beginning, it felt like, okay, maybe we can do this, but the pressure continues to rise. And then something happens, the unexpected, something they hadn't planned for or predicted. You know what happens? The HVAC in the house goes out. We know what happens? It's the SUV breaks down and now needs maintenance. You know what they did not anticipate is the orthodontist saying, your kids need braces. And they had not planned and budgeted for that. And so now they're in this place where they had a little bit of breathing room. Now they've kind of overextended themselves, and there's so much pressure that they feel all the time. And that pressure is starting to mount, and the cracks are beginning to show. He's now working late and not home for dinner or to tuck the kids in. And she's now so exhausted and so drained that even the things that used to bring her joy are now very heavy on her heart. And you know what happens from here is they start arguing, mostly about money. And now they're fighting and they're on different pages with one another. And inside of them, they feel stuck. They feel like they're strapped. They're overwhelmed. They're desperate for some change in their life. And then they come to realize the mistake that they had made. What they had done is they had traded one thing for another, is that in chasing their higher standard of living, what they had actually done is they had lowered their quality of life. They had good intentions. We're going to build a better life for ourselves. But in the meantime, they had made a trade-off that was now actually costing them, that was stretching them. They're stressed, and now they're spread too thin. And I wonder maybe if you've ever experienced this. Maybe not you, maybe the home that you grew up in. If not the home you grew up in, have you ever seen this pressure on other people? When they're living in a place where they've bought into an ideal that if I would just raise my standard of living would give me a better life. But somewhere and quickly it becomes a trade-off into now there's no freedom, there's pressure, and they feel trapped. And it doesn't just impact them financially. This isn't just about numbers and spreadsheets. This is about what happens emotionally and relationally, mentally, and where they would be. And so it ends up costing them something. And this is a problem that's systematic. If you just look at the American household and the American way of life and how we get to the dreams that we have inside of our heart, there's some processes along the way that I want to warn you about. In fact, Scripture is going to warn us a lot about. Here's where it starts. It's a truth that we really have to acknowledge, but we don't like it up front, is that you and I are sold a lie. What is the lie? Here's the lie, is that happiness is just an upgrade away. What we've convinced ourselves is that I need more. If I just had a little bit more, then I would be happy. Now, we already know this is not true because we even have statements like, money can't buy. Yeah, we know this. We know it's not true, but somewhere it's put in front of us in a way that if you would just buy bigger, if you would just go with better. And we keep falling for the same kind of traps where we're just convinced, where we're told that your success is measured by the size of your home. Your success is measured in the type of car that you drive, where your kids go to school, or the vacations that you're posting about on Instagram. We know that happiness doesn't buy success, but the lie that we buy is if I would just upgrade, it's somehow going to improve the quality of my life. And we're promised that more stuff is going to somehow equal more joy. Why do we end up buying into this? Well, it's in front of us constantly, and somewhere we have FOMO. We have fear of missing out. Look, I see the places that you go on your vacations, and I think, man, I deserve that. I want that. I want to go get that. I see when the new purchase happens and somebody else has, and I think I just need to keep up with. And what I convince myself is I need it. I deserve it. I work hard, and I've earned it. Now, I might not have all of the money for it right now, but I really do deserve that thing. And so you know what we do? We convince ourselves that I need it now, don't we? And you know what we do? We swipe it, don't we? Yeah, it's easy to do that. Just run the plastic through the machine. That's not going to cost me a whole lot. What do? We end up borrowing the money just to buy the lie. We finance the furniture. I mean, come on, my wife and I, we've been looking at some really sweet furniture, and it is just so tempting in this moment. We finance the furniture. We upgrade the SUV. I can't be driving around this 10-year-old busted up truck. I got to get a better car. I can't be seen in that. I'm going to book that dream vacation. I know I can't. I'll pay for it tomorrow. And we borrow money in the moment, believing that somehow it's just going to make things better, that it's going to make us happy. But let me just ask you this. Have you ever bought something and you kind of anticipated, you imagined how it was going to make you feel, and then when you got it after a couple of days, you realize it didn't fulfill you in the way that you thought, and now there's actually a term for it, buyer's remorse. Have you ever experienced any version of that in your life before? Yeah, multiple times over. I'm attracted to new and shiny things, especially technology, and it gets there and I'm like, this doesn't bring me the joy that I thought it was going to bring. And now I owe for the thing, and there's no joy that it was supposed to bring. And so now we're in this place, and here's what we discover, and you know this, is that debt will make a promise to you. It promises to upgrade your life, but ultimately it always falls short, and it leads ourselves to a downgrade. Debt promises the upgrade, but delivers on the downgrade. And see, at first we feel it. It's like, okay, look. And then the bills stack. You ever been there before? And you just see them come in and you don't even want to open the mailbox anymore? Just put it over there with the rest of them. Why? Because you know what it brings, and the stress and the lack of breathing room and the anxiety that it causes. Why? Because we've made a trade-off. The bigger house comes with the bigger mortgage. The luxury car, well, it's not a luxury payment, is it? And along with this, the dream vacation turns into a credit card balance that you're still paying off years after the beach. And this happens to us over and over and over again. And what happens is now, instead of what was supposed to be an upgrade in our life, now it's really been a downgrade, because instead of now owning the stuff is now owning me. Now, instead of being in a place where I'm living with peace, I'm now under a new kind of pressure. And there's no margin, there's no room. And now, instead of focusing on what really matters in my life, do you know what I'm forced to focus on? How I'm going to pay that bill. What's the next thing that's due? How are we going to get through the rest of this month? And now it's completely changed the entire trajectory of my life, and it has robbed from me. It has stole from me. It promised an upgrade but delivers a downgrade. And now, you know what we end up doing? Is we're working more just to pay for the more that doesn't really even matter, to impress people that I don't really even care about. And we have these things and we say, you know what? I just need to upgrade my life. And at the same time, we're downgrading our quality of living. And we're making a trade-off that's costing us dearly. The average American family is in tens of thousands of debt. Now, if you feel like, hey, I'm only a few $100s, then that's good for you. If you're debt-free, then absolutely wonderful. But the average American family is feeling the crushing weight of this pressure. Tens of thousands of dollars, $50,000, some $100,000. I owe. So off to work I go. And we feel this pressure, and the mortgage company, the credit card company, the auto loans, the student loans, and all of it is now piling up on us, and we wonder why we feel like, I just need to catch my breath, but there's no breathing room. And the statistics will show us that the average household is just one unexpected expense from being in absolute crisis. And so the problem is really clear for us. We've been sold this lie that many of us buy, and now we've dug ourselves into a problem, and it's like, well, how do I get out of this? What am I supposed to do? Well, the good news for us is that God's plan has nothing to do with the way that we're currently living in many ways, and that Jesus himself has so much to say on this, and he's going to warn us about it, and then he shows us how to escape it. So that's what I want to do with you for just a few minutes. So let's do this. Let's go and look at what Jesus says about money. Now, you probably know that he talked a lot about this. In fact, it's one of the things that he would talk about most, like even more than he would talk about heaven. And as Jesus approaches this, I love because I never find a place where he was asking other people for money. I always see that Jesus wanted something for them and not from them. And as we look at this, what you're immediately going to discover is God wants you to have freedom in your finances, not living strapped and stressed all of the time. And what would it look like? And so watch what Jesus says to us as he helps us, and he's going to warn you out the gate. Watch what he says. Then he says to them, watch out. Can we say that one together? Like, watch out. Be what? Be on your guard. Watch out. Be on your guard. He's giving us a warning in this moment, and he says, you need to be aware that this is the ways of the world, and he knows, he understands what you're going to face. He knows the inclinations on the inside of your heart, how you're going to be tempted by material possessions, by wealth of this world, and he needs you to understand something. Be on guard. Watch out. Look out for all kinds of greed. Now, you might think greed is just Scrooge McDuck, but greed sits in our hearts in numerous different ways. And he says, you need to be aware of the greed of your own heart because it's going to come knocking, whether you got 30K, whether you make 100K or 200K. It does not matter because it's not just about the money. It's about what's happening behind it all. And he says, your life does not consist in what? An abundance of possessions, about your stuff. It's not all about that. So watch out. Now, as he's telling us this verse here, he goes on and he really helps to kind of build out his illustration. He goes into a parable right after this, and it's called the rich fool. And it uses the word fool because here's a guy who was, according to Jesus, he was doing well. And he was becoming more wealthy. He had started off as a base level, but he continued to experience increase in his life. There was now more money, there was more produce, there was more things happening in his life than ever before. And what he assumed is my blessing just means I need to build bigger and better barns. I need to accumulate things for me. I need to build up my status, and I'm going to elevate my quality of living. And Jesus helps us to see that your life is not about those possessions. He warns us, and he calls this guy a fool because none of that stuff is really going to matter in the end. And you made it about building bigger barns and a better quality of life, and you have lowered who God has called you to be, and you're chasing after something in the end that really won't amount to much. And I just wonder in our own lives, and some of us, anytime there's any kind of increase, anytime there's like, okay, here's just a little bit more money, you started out at entry level, maybe the Lord brought you a promotion. You know what we do with it? Every time we assume, I've been blessed, that must mean God wants me to build bigger and better barns. And what he says to you is just because he's bringing blessing into your life, it does not mean that it's supposed to be about possessions and building bigger and better barns. Your life is not about this. And so we begin to see the problem, but this problem is really played out a little bit bigger if we would just rewind a little bit to a proverb, which is ancient. It's from the Old Testament. And this proverb, it really helps us to see the relationship and what happens when we are in debt, when we owe other people money. Here's what it says to us. The rich rule over the poor, and let's read this line together on 3. 1, 2, 3. And the borrower is slave to the lender. And the borrower is slave to the lender. And this is really a powerful idea, very strong, vivid, visual language that he's giving us here. Who's the borrower? The borrower is any person who is spending more money than what they earn or what they currently have. The borrower is the person that is, you know what, today I have a desire, a want, maybe even a need, and I'm going to go ahead and spend your money, and then I'll figure out in the future how to pay you back. It's living beyond our own means. That's the borrower, and he's establishing relationships. So the borrower is in relationship with the lender. Who's the lender? In our case, most of the time, that's, well, who holds your mortgage? Who holds your automobile loan, right? The lender is the person who says, you know what? I will gladly give you this in exchange for, well, don't forget that you owe me. And he begins to establish what happens when we owe. And it's not just I owe you money. It's an entire change of relationship. When this debt begins to sit in, the borrower is a slave to the lender. Now, in biblical times, in Jesus' day, if you owed somebody money, they literally could come and arrest you. They could literally throw you in chains, put you in jail, and lock you away. They could force you into slavery. They could force you to work. And if they can't get the money from you, they're coming to your close of kin. In the old days, you could literally be enslaved. Now, we handle debt a little bit differently today, but make no mistake, the borrower is still slave to the lender. Slaves have a master. They have someone who's calling the shots. They have somebody who's directing their lives. And for many of us, what happens to us is that we have borrowed from Bank of America. We have borrowed from our loan company. And now guess who's in position of power in our lives? Guess who doesn't get to decide when they're going to get up and go to work anymore? Guess who doesn't get to decide where they're going to go on vacation, what they're going to spend their money on? If I don't honor the lender, they come and take away my stuff. Now who's in control of my life? MasterCard is now my master. The bank now holds even my direction of my life. My paycheck itself, it doesn't belong to me anymore. You lose the freedom to choose when you're in this kind of relationship. In fact, Jesus would go on and he helps us to understand a little bit further of what happens here, that slaves have masters. And then Jesus leans into this idea, and he needs you to see this because this is something that draws us away. It's not just financial. It's not just dollars and cents. This is spiritual and deep implications for you and I, especially if you're a Christ follower. This is what Jesus comes and he helps us to understand this. He says, nobody can serve two masters. Now you may think to yourself, well, Paul's, I don't have anybody mastering my life. Look, mastery can be anything that owns you and controls you and aims your directions, which it could be, I don't know, it could be addiction. It could be drugs. It could be anything that controls you, manipulates you, and sends you in a direction. And so what happens here, you think, well, I don't have masters over me. Well, can you do what you want to do financially? Or do they tell you what to do because you're now enslaved to them? And Jesus leans into here and he says, look, you need to understand this. This isn't just about your finances. This is about who has control of your life and what is over your heart. He says, nobody can have two masters. Either you're going to hate the one and love the other, or you're going to be devoted to the one and you're going to despise the other. And this is what you need to know, is you cannot serve both God and money, mammon, possessions, wealth, your stuff. And he says this idea, the borrower is slave to the lender. And so we've made these financial transactions in our lives, and we've now put another master over our heart. So no matter our best intentions, God, I want to honor you with my finances. I want to live in alignment with your word and what you say about my resources. Now I'm kind of strapped. I'm kind of stuck, and it stresses me out. And Jesus says, you're going to have a really hard time honoring what God wants you to do and who he wants you to be, because you've got another master that's sitting over you and now holds your life by the reins. You cannot serve both God and money. And so who's calling the shots in your life? Like, be honest. Do you have another master? Is there another person? Here's what you would need to see, is that money is a really powerful tool, but it is a terrible, taskmaster. It's a really powerful tool and leveraged when we align our lives with God and the Lord brings increase. And then we say, God, you can do what you want with it. It is a really powerful tool, but it is a terrible master. It begins to control you and dictate your life where you no longer have freedom and you're enslaved to it. Let me show you what happens when you are now living with another master that is indeed terrible. Here's what it's going to cost you. First and foremost, it's going to cost you peace, financial breathing room. When we don't have it, it costs us peace. Now, statistically, we see that this is one of the number one causes in people's life for mental and emotional health. Is money issues, anxiety and fears, worries. This is one of the things that impacts us with anxiety and depression, insomnia, high blood pressure. It creates these health issues. We don't have breathing room. I don't have peace. I only experience the pressure, and it begins to cost us. It costs us more than just money. It costs us our peace. It costs us our relationships. Statistics, again, show us one of the number one causes of divorce, money. Now, you don't need statistics to know what it feels like when you're at odds on what to do with your money and you're stressed financially and you're trying to figure it all out and you don't know how you're going to make it through. And the weight of that moment, it takes your breath away. It costs us in our deepest relationships and puts strains on families. And then it costs us our purpose, and maybe most significantly, our purpose. This is costing us our ability to say yes to what God might be leading you to. Just suppose for a moment that it was in your heart. You felt compelled to maybe, pick up and move to a new city. But because you're enslaved to your debt and you're upside down on your mortgage, you're stuck, not going anywhere. Suppose it was to pursue a new career, or maybe your wife or husband stay home from work. But because of your financial obligations and the credit card bills and the hospital bills, because of these things, you now cannot do your purpose, the thing that you believe God would call you to do, and start that business, move across town. Maybe it's something significant. Like maybe God has put a dream within your heart that to maybe adopt a child. And you would love to do that. And you can see yourself, you can imagine what it would be like to have the child with you. And then every time you go and you try to figure out how to get there, you're again strapped and you're stuck. And it's costing you your very purpose. Maybe it's your kid's future. Maybe it's a ministry. Maybe it's God has prompted your heart and you've seen a family in need and you would love to help out. You want to bless other people, but every time you go and try to figure it out, you can't find the room to make it happen. And I've told you this story before, but this was my wife and I's account. When we were young adult pastors up in Atlanta, one of the challenges that we faced was we had accumulated credit card debt. She had a car payment. And we were trying to figure all of this stuff out, and we were newly married, and I had some things from my past that I had floated on margin. And now we're in this moment when we're pastoring and a need is presented. There was a guy in our young adult ministry who used to run production like what you guys are doing in the back. And I would see him all the time. He's squinting his eyes. He can't see very well. Bro, why don't you get some glasses? I can't afford glasses. Well, we want to help you. And then my wife and I ran into the limitation that we were too over-leveraged and we could not come up with a couple of $100s to make a difference in somebody else's life. And in that moment, we had look, we need to call a timeout. We need to do something different. We are not in a position that God has called us to. We're having to say no to God's purpose because we said yes to so many other things that have only brought us stress. Every time that you're in a position where you have another master, and that master is indeed your money, you're not following the direction of the Lord. You're following wherever work tells you you have to go. And this is not how God designed you to live in your life. And so debt limits your ability to say yes to God. What of this is it costing you? Someone you love, somebody that you care about. What have you seen? How have you seen its impact on other people's marriages? What does that look like? And so Jesus begins to speak into this. He says, okay, here's the very clear problem. We've made it about the accumulation of stuff and wealth, and we've missed the most important. And in the process, we've actually made ourselves slaves. So what do you need to do? He begins to help us here in Matthew. He begins to speak, and he says, look, here's some do's and don'ts. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. Pretty simple, right? Realize that everything here on this earth, even the best of it, and I like some nice things, even that thing is not going to last. Why would you store up treasures here on earth where moths could break in or vermin could destroy, where thieves can break in and steal? Don't do that. You don't want to make this life about the accumulation of wealth and building bigger barns. Don't do that. Here's what you should do instead. He says, do store up for yourselves treasures in where? Yeah, eternal treasures. These are the things that outlast time itself. These are the investments into relationships, into people, into church ministries, into things that are ultimately going to stand the test of time, and they're not depreciating in value. He says, look, you need to store up for yourself treasures in heaven. Don't get this backwards. The world gets it backwards. Don't get it backwards. Where moths and vermin do not destroy, where thieves do not break in and steal. He's helping us to understand this, and then watch how he goes from here. And he says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And this is a really famous verse, Jesus talking about money, for a reason. See, money isn't just about the money. It's indicative of who's in control, of what has our heart, of the direction of our lives. In fact, your money's direction begins to reveal your heart's affection. Where your money is going tells a story. And so if you just look at your checkbook, we don't do those anymore. If you look at your balance sheet and you begin to see, where is my money going? Who's really in control of my life? What do I really hold in high regard? This begins to be indicative of the things that are most important to you. And you may say, well, I'm not storing up treasures here on earth. This will help you to actually measure whether that's true or not. This is the measuring stick. And so your money's direction begins to reveal your heart's affection, what you're looking for, what you expect to bring joy and fulfillment in your life, what contentment looks like or doesn't look like in your life. It begins to show us a picture, and ultimately, it's not really even about money. A lot of times it transfers over into trust. Who am I trusting? Who's my provider? What am I looking to? This begins to paint a picture, and so let me ask you that same question. Where's your treasure? What does that look like? What's at the center of your heart? And would your money paint the same picture that your mouth tells about? So let me do this. I'm going to give you 5 things. We've talked about the spiritual problem. We've talked about some of the implications, the stuff that it costs us. I'm going to give you 5 simple and very, very practical helps. But let me give you a little bit of a disclaimer, okay? So I don't want to make an assumption about you, and I don't want to assume that if you're struggling financially, then you've just over-leveraged yourself and you were dumb with debt. That's not what I'm assuming here. But what I am leaning into is where we are as a culture and how much it is costing, not just those out there, but how much it is costing us inside the church. Families who want to honor God, singles who want to do it God's way. But along the way, we've been sold a lie that we've bought into. And as we lean into this, all of this isn't going to be a quick fix. I'm going to give you very practical things, and honestly, you could find this on Google if you wanted to find it. I'm going to give you 5 simple things, but they're not necessarily hard things. They're discipline-oriented things. If you really want change in financial breathing room, it means that you're going to recognize my life needs to look different. My heart has to reflect different. And these are practical things that would help you as we do this. So here's the very first one, okay? So living with financial freedom. The first thing that you need to do is track your spending, okay? And this one is really, it's kind of a no-brainer. It's really about awareness. If you don't know where your money is going, you can't really recognize the problem. And so what this says to us is commit to the Lord, whatever you do, and he's going to establish your plans. As you're asking God and praying through this process, God, help me to just see what it is I'm doing with my money. How am I honoring you? How am I leaning into a direction that's not really where I want to go? But if I'm honest, I am kind of going. This helps you to just get a very clear picture. This isn't about guilt, okay? This isn't even about even making any changes. You just need to acknowledge and be honest with yourself where it's going. So practically, what do you need to do? I don't know, call it the next 30 days. Maybe you came into this year, I'm gonna get out of debt in 2025. That's awesome. How are you gonna do it? The first thing that you might need to do is for the next 30 days, just track where your money is going. We used to have to do this on paper and then it became a Google spreadsheet. Now there's wonderful apps that just help you to see and categorize your expenses. This is not complicated, but it is a matter of discipline. Would you be willing to do that, okay? Create some awareness on where your money is going. Here's the second thing, is spend less than you make. I told you these were gonna be simple. Spend less money than what you actually make. And this one, my friend, maybe more than all of the other ones, this one gives you a sense of peace where there was pressure, and spend less than you are actually bringing in. And so whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. All of that pursuit is indeed worthless. And so this one becomes about the peace that you have in your life. And this is a big one. Spending less than what you actually make is really simple to say, until the next shiny thing, the big thing, until the next time that you're scrolling, until the next time that vacation presents itself. Where are we gonna go this year? What are we gonna do? How are we gonna one-up what we did last time? And that is the trap. And it's easy to say, okay, we're just gonna spend less than you earn. Unless there's some kind of heart change and discipline type change, this one becomes one of the most difficult. And truth be told, you might actually have to lower your standard of living just to raise your quality of life. You might actually have to make some pretty hard changes to do this. Okay, and so here we go. Third one is to eliminate debt. Okay, this is a big one. How do we do that? What does it look like? Romans says to us, let no debt remain outstanding, all right? So this is not a place that we should continue to have debt. What does it look like for us as Christians? How would we begin to eliminate it? This one is all about freedom. As we've looked at, debt is basically chains and putting us into slavery. And actually eliminating this will bring freedom to our lives. And so very practically speaking, maybe you've heard before about a debt snowball. This is one of the approaches made famous by a guy named Dave Ramsey. And what does that look like? Maybe you want to eliminate debt in your life and it's overwhelming. How do we get out of the hole? Maybe you need to start by listing your smallest debt first and then the next. And now you're going to put money to pay off the first one, roll that money into the second one, create the snowball. What does that look like? I don't know exactly for you, but for my wife and I, can I be honest, we went through this and had to get to this step. And I was so excited. We had so much momentum. And then I got here and it felt like we just got stuck. It took us 18 months for us to claw our way out. You know how fast I could swipe that credit card? Man, I could spend some money in a hurry, but to get out of it, man, that cost me way more. And so what does it look like for you to eliminate debt in your life? All right, and so save for emergencies becomes the next one. And this one is to help you to have a little bit of space in your life when the unexpected happens. When the HVAC goes out, when that car does need some repair. Currently in this moment, what would you do? Do you have the extra cash flow to help to offset that expense of that emergency? Or would you have to pull out plastic again and yet further perpetuate the problem? When we get here, it's saving for emergencies. What does it say? The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools will gulp down every single thing that comes into their lives. It came in, let me spend it as quick as it came in. The wise will actually store up. They'll create a place of margin or breathing room in their lives. And now they have a sense of security. There's a bit of financial peace. There's breathing room. And you're not always stressed because you know what? Things do happen in life. And I don't have to get overly worked up about that. We planned and prepared. We actually have emergency funds for this. And so practically speaking, you got to start somewhere. So pick a number. Suggestions, save $1,000. Get there as fast as you can. And then from there, build it up higher, 3 months, 6 months worth of your living expenses. If you lost your job, if you had a health issue, what would you do? This will create financial peace and give you a bit of freedom. Number 5, and finally, is give generously. Now this one, it might seem like the most counterintuitive of all of them. Like, whoa, like time out. I'm trying to fix my mess and you want me to give away the money that's supposed to claw me out of the mess? Yes, because it was never just about dollars and cents to begin with. And this one deals with what is underlying, what is in the surface. This goes straight to the heart of the issue. Because by giving, by being a generous person, I'm acknowledging, God, you're the source of my life anyway. Everything that you have brought into my life, it is a gift that you've entrusted to me. And every time that I would open up my hands and I would stop clenching, because this is what happens when there's no breathing room. I'm stressed and I'm wondering how I'm going to make it through. There's no way I can ever give. And God begins to teach us that this is the antidote to the consumerism, to the greed, to the ideas that I just need to build bigger barns, that every piece of increase is about me, myself, my family, and what we can accumulate. God helps you to see in this moment that his purposes for your money are so different than this. He wants you to have provision, but in the same time, he wants you to be in a position where your hands are open. If I give it to them, will they give it to someone else? If I can bring the increase to Hope, will she then share it with the next person? This is what it looks like. And Timothy says to us, command them to do good. What does do good look like? Well, do good in rich deeds and be generous and willing to share. And so how do we do that? What does that mean like? It may mean that you need to have some sort of plan, even before you've figured all the rest of it out, that simply says, okay, God, I know I don't have a lot, but whatever I have, I'm just trusting to you. If you speak to me about how to give it or what to do with it, and I'll be faithful to follow. And I would just double dog dare you to start there. This is one of the things in my life that has changed the most things in my life. God, whatever it is, you can have it. You've given it to me. You're the provider of it all. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to trust you. And by becoming generous, it changes everything. It's the antidote to what culture perpetuates to us. And so let me just give them all back to you as we wrap this part of it up. And so here's the 5 steps to financial freedom. Track your spending, spend less, eliminate debt, save for emergencies, and then give generously. So I want to go back to where we started. So I was talking about Mark and Sarah, and I told you about their situation, how it looks very similar to many of us. That along the way that we begin to believe the idea that I just want to build a better life, and building a better life is somehow about, well, let me upgrade my life. They had done exactly that. And while I did change the names of them, they do represent real people that I know. And I watched as they went through the struggles that we've talked about and the pressures and what it did inside of their marriage and their relationship. And I watched them just after the place of, can we actually put braces on our kids' teeth? For us, my wife and I, can we actually support this guy and buy him eyeglasses? For them, it was something that brought them to a moment where they had to examine how they're doing their lives. And they had to make a conscious decision in their head and in their heart. Am I living my life with alignment to what God says about what I do with my money? Or am I so stressed and living under a pressure that he never intended for me? What are we going to do differently? And I'm telling you that I watched this couple begin to employ some of the things that we're talking about here, starting with the basics, walking through the difficulty, doing the disciplines, and clawing their way out of the hole that they had dug themselves in, to end up on the other side of it, to actually have a place of, for the money stress to be gone, for them to connect with each other again, for their family to have what it needs, not in excess, but sufficiency, content. And as they made the difference in their lives, it inspired me and challenges me. So many of you in this room have done similar things. Maybe you didn't have it all figured out to begin with, but God's given you wisdom and you learned how to leverage your money. And can I just say that when we get this, and it really does end up in the fifth one, and we shift gears on what it means to make investments, not just into myself, but into others, this is what changes everything. And some of you have actually been in that position where you've walked this out. And some of you have even made a difference in my life, in my wife's life. Hard times still come. I'm a pastor, she's a teacher. I still get strapped every once in a while. And the Lord sent some of you into our lives to be that we needed, to be the generosity that I was praying for. And I just tell the Lord back, I'm like, God, that's who I want to be. That's what I want to do. I want every dollar that I get to make a difference in the lives of somebody else. And this isn't just one individual, because some of you have really gotten a hold of this and you've went through the process of understanding, okay, God, I'm going to honor you with my money. I'm going to claw my way out of debt. I'm going to live on less than I make, and I'm going to look for opportunity to make a difference. Some of you do that in such a way that our kids are next door, and right now in this moment, they're having a wonderful kids service with great curriculum. Some of you have sponsored youth here in this church so that they can go to camp during the summers. Some of you, when there's families here in this house and they've lost their job, you know what you do? You reach deep into your own pockets. Why? Because you're in a place of giving generously and you're living differently. And it makes all the difference in the world. And this, my friend, is a picture of what it's supposed to look like. And what does that look like for you? Be honest. Like in this moment, where would you say that you are in these steps? Are you somehow underneath it all, feeling the stress and the pressures of money? Are you in the place where you just kind of live your life as long as there's money in the bank, as long as there's still numbers in the account, it doesn't matter, we don't really have a plan? Are you in the final phase of this where it's like, you know what? We are intentional about giving generously, about being a blessing to other people. Where are you in this? And what step is the Lord calling you to take today? What will you do with it? I want to pray that we could all come to a spot where we say, you know what, God? We want to honor you with our money. We want to live with financial breathing room. We don't want to be enslaved. God, will you help to just break some of these chains off of our life? Help us do the difficult, disciplined thing, clawing our way out of this debt. But most importantly, God, we want to be a people who honors you and blesses others. That's who we are. We are a generous church, and you are called to be a generous person. I want to pray for you today. I want to pray that you have the courage to take whatever step it is that you're on. Can we do that? Father, I thank you, God, that you are so gracious with us, that when our heart drifts and our eyes become fixed on the things of this world, when we make it about upgrades and building better barns, God, when we somehow become selfish with our own money, will you forgive us of that? And God, would you help us as we recognize the truth that the borrower is slave to the lender, and that some of our lives or aspects of our lives are not even under our own control, but are mastered by our money. Will you help us to break the chains that enslave us? Will you help us to see money as you intended it to be, as a tool, but never a master? And God, will you help us to honor you with every increase, every dollar that you bring into our lives? Lord, we open up our hands, we open up our hearts. We say, God, lead us that we might be generous. In Jesus' name, amen and amen.